Ethan stood at the edge of the dense jungle, his breath steady as his eyes scanned the dark, overgrown path ahead. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and unknown, dangerous creatures. The towering trees around him swayed in the breeze, their leaves rustling in a language that felt ancient. He tightened the straps on his armor, a patchwork of scavenged metal and leather that had saved his life countless times. The mission ahead was simple, or so it seemed. Rescue the twins. The alien queen, the mother of the children, had promised him a reward, but Ethan didn't care much about that. All that mattered was saving the twins. After hearing the news of their capture, he had traveled across galaxies, fought through hostile worlds, and now, finally, he was standing at the doorstep of danger. "Just get them out," he whispered, to himself, tightening his grip on his weapon. The queen had been clear about one thing. This jungle was alive with monsters, and these were no ordinary beasts. They were huge, ferocious, and ruthless. The monsters who had kidnapped the twins were part of a much larger, savage tribe that controlled the region. They had been holding the children hostage for what felt like weeks, and their queen had pleaded for help. In return for his bravery, she had promised him a priceless reward. But Ethan was focused on one thing only: the twins. As he ventured deeper into the jungle, the silence grew heavier. The thick vines and trees blocked out much of the light, casting the path ahead in eerie shadows. Strange noises echoed from all directions, roars, screeches, and growls that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Yet, he pressed on. The first sign of trouble came too quickly. A massive, shadowy figure darted between the trees, barely visible, but Ethan caught a glimpse of its glowing eyes. It was big, too big. His pulse quickened as he dropped to a crouch, blending into the thick underbrush. He had been trained for moments like this. His heart pounded, but his mind was calm. From the distance, the creature let out a low, rumbling growl. It was hunting, and it was hunting him. Ethan's hand slid to the hilt of his blade. His weapon was a long, curved sword made of a rare metal that cut through almost anything. It had served him well in previous battles, and today he hoped it would be enough. Slowly, carefully, he rose to his feet, watching the shadows. The creature stepped forward, its massive body blocking the way. It was a hulking, four-legged beast with sharp spines protruding from its back. Its scales shimmered darkly under the faint light, and its claws scraped the ground as it sniffed the air. Ethan stayed still, knowing any movement could give him away. Then, without warning, the beast lunged toward him. Ethan, Quota's reflexes kicked in. He dodged to the side just in time, the creature's claws scraping past him with a roar. He rolled on the ground, narrowly avoiding its heavy weight crashing down. His heart raced, but he didn't have time to be afraid. In one smooth motion, he grabbed his sword, its edge gleaming. The creature turned, its growls echoing through the jungle. Ethan's grip tightened on the hilt of his sword, and with a swift motion, he charged forward. The creature snapped at him, but he ducked low, rolling beneath its jaws. He slashed upwards, the blade catching the creature's exposed belly. Blood poured out in thick, steaming waves as the beast staggered back, howling in pain. Ethan didn't hesitate. He was already on his feet, following through with another powerful strike. The blade dug deep into the creature's side, and with a final roar, the monster collapsed, its life fading fast. Breathing heavily, Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. The battle was over, but he knew it was only the beginning. The jungle was full of monsters far worse than the one he had just slain. The hardest part of the journey was yet to come. Ethan didn't take time to rest. The twins were still out there, and every second mattered. He quickly gathered his things, ensuring his weapon was secure, before continuing on the path. As he pushed deeper into the jungle, the air seemed to grow heavier. The monsters were relentless here, and Ethan would have to be on guard at all times. But there was something else that made him uneasy, something not quite right about the atmosphere. The air was thick with magic. Ethan had been to many alien worlds, but this one felt different. The jungle seemed alive, and not just with the creatures. There was a strange energy pulsing through the ground, the trees, the very air itself. It was a feeling he couldn't explain, but it made his skin prickle, and every instinct he had screamed that this world was older than anything he had ever encountered. He pushed on, the faint cries of the twins ringing in his mind, urging him forward. Hours passed. The jungle became denser, darker, and more dangerous. Ethan fought off more monsters, each more terrifying than the last. But with every battle, his body grew heavier, his limbs slower. His armor, once lightweight and nimble, now felt like a weight he couldn't shed. Yet he knew he couldn't stop. Not now. It wasn't until nightfall that he stumbled upon the first clue to where the twins might be. Hidden deep in the underbrush was a strange marking, an ancient symbol carved into the bark of a tree. The symbol was unlike anything Ethan had seen before. It looked almost like a map, though distorted and incomplete. He studied it carefully, the faint glow of the symbol lighting up his path. Ethan's heart raced. This was it. The twins were close. He followed the markings, pushing through the thick vegetation. As the jungle grew darker, the sounds of the creatures around him seemed to grow louder. The growls and howls were now constant, echoing through the night. But Ethan didn't flinch. He had faced worse before, and he would face it again. Minutes turned into hours as he pressed on. The exhaustion weighed on him, but the thought of the twins kept him moving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached a clearing. The air was thick with tension. The clearing was eerily quiet, and the trees surrounding it seemed to lean in, watching him. In the center of the clearing was a massive stone structure, an old temple, long abandoned. The markings on the trees had led him here. And there, in the heart of the temple, Ethan could hear the faint cries of the twins. He wasn't alone. As Ethan stepped closer to the entrance of the temple, a cold chill ran down his spine. He wasn't sure what he was about to face, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to be ready for anything. The twins were waiting for him. And he was about to face the true horrors of this jungle. Ethan stood at the entrance of the ancient temple, his heart pounding in his chest. The air felt colder here, and the atmosphere was thick with danger. The faint cries of the twins still echoed through the walls of the temple, urging him forward. He didn't have much time. He could feel that with every passing moment the creatures of the jungle were closing in, drawn by the noise of his movements. But this wasn't just any temple. It was something old, something dangerous, and Ethan could feel its presence. His instincts told him to tread carefully. He'd fought countless monsters already, but this place had a different energy. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the darkness of the temple. His boots echoed on the stone floor as he moved further into the shadows. The inside of the temple was vast and empty, save for the remnants of forgotten rituals, carvings on the walls, statues of long-dead gods, and faded tapestries that fluttered in the breeze. The only light came from the faint glow of bioluminescent, moss growing in cracks between the stones. He moved quietly, but his mind raced. He had to get to the twins. They were close now. He could feel it in his bones. As he advanced deeper into the temple, the air grew even colder, and the walls seemed to close in on him. The faint cries grew louder, sharper, and then they stopped. It was as if the twins had sensed him approaching. His pulse quickened. He had to be close. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet trembled. The walls shook, and the entire temple seemed to groan with ancient power. Ethan froze. His hand instinctively went to his sword, his fingers tightening around the hilt. Something was coming. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. The sound of footsteps echoed through the temple. They were heavy, rhythmic, and coming from all directions. Ethan's heart rate spiked. The monsters were here. A low growl rumbled through the temple, followed by a loud screeching roar that made the ground beneath him vibrate. Ethan's eyes widened as the first creature stepped into the dim light. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of a human. Its skin was covered in thick armored plates that glimmered in the faint light. The creature had long, muscular arms ending in sharp claws, and its eyes glowed with an eerie green light. It had the face of a wolf, but its teeth were as long as daggers. Its mouth opened wide as it let out another terrifying roar. Ethan's grip tightened on his sword. His legs slightly bent in a defensive stance. He didn't have time to think about how he got here, or how he would survive. The only thing that mattered now was defeating this creature and getting to the twins. The creature lunged at him with surprising speed, its claws aimed for Ethan's throat. Ethan sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the monster's strike. The creature's claws raked across the stone floor, sending sparks flying into the air. Ethan swung his sword in response, aiming for the creature's side. His blade met its armored skin with a loud clang, but the armor was thick. It would take more than one blow to defeat this beast. Ethan dodged another swipe, rolling to the side to avoid being hit. He was quick, but the creature was fast, its movements wild and unpredictable. The monster growled. Ethan moved deeper into the heart of the temple. The sounds of battle faded behind him as he pressed forward, but his body was screaming in protest. His muscles ached from the fights, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Despite the exhaustion, there was no turning back. The twins were somewhere ahead, trapped and waiting. He could almost feel their presence, the faint pull that urged him onward. The temple grew darker the further he went, and the air became heavier. Strange carvings lined the walls, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. The deeper he went, the more he felt like he was walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The walls seemed to close in around him, pressing down, and the very ground beneath his boots felt as if it was alive, shifting and changing with every step. Then, through the silence, he heard it. A faint cry. It was soft at first, barely a whisper, but it sent a chill down Ethan's spine. The sound of the twins' voices trapped, calling for help. His heart clenched. They were close. He could hear them. Without a second thought, Ethan pushed himself forward, forcing his body to move despite the growing fatigue. The cries grew louder as he neared the heart of the temple. The sound was now unmistakable, desperate and terrified. The twins needed him. As he reached a wide chamber, the cries stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. His mind raced, and he instinctively drew his sword, his eyes scanning the room. This was it. The twins had to be here. The chamber was vast, a high ceiling supported by ancient stone pillars. At the far end of the room stood a large stone altar, where the twins were chained, their small bodies barely visible in the dim light. They were surrounded by a group of creatures, their eyes glowing with malice. These were no ordinary monsters. They were different, more intelligent, and they knew exactly what they were doing. Ethan's blood ran cold as he studied the scene. The creatures weren't just guarding the twins. They were preparing for something. He had seen rituals like this before, and the thought of what they might be planning for the children made his stomach twist in knots. The twins were bound to the altar, their arms and legs restrained by thick chains. Their eyes were wide with fear, but there was a glimmer of hope in them when they saw Ethan. They recognized him even in the shadows. Their cries had stopped, replaced with a soft whisper as they gazed at him with a mixture of relief and terror. Ethan's heart broke at the sight of them. The creatures surrounding them were like nothing he had faced before. Tall, thin, and covered in dark, leathery skin, they had elongated limbs and sharp, claw-like fingers. Their faces were almost human, but their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their expressions were filled with malicious intent. These were not mindless beasts. These were hunters, and they were playing with their prey. He didn't have much time. The creatures were circling the altar, their low murmurs filling the air. Ethan could hear them talking in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. They were planning to sacrifice the twins. Without hesitation, Ethan rushed forward, his sword raised high. The creatures turned to face him, their eyes narrowing in unison. The moment they saw him, they let out a loud, eerie hiss, and without warning, they lunged toward him. Ethan's heart raced, but he remained calm. He had fought creatures like these before, but there were too many of them. The odds weren't in his favor, but he wouldn't back down. The first creature reached him in a flash, its claws slashing through the air. Ethan ducked just in time, rolling to the side and bringing his sword down in a sweeping motion. The creature screeched as his blade cut through its arm, sending it stumbling back. But before he could catch his breath, another creature was on him, its claws aiming for his chest. Ethan twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. He countered with a quick slash, the blade cutting across the creature's chest, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature staggered back but recovered quickly, its glowing eyes filled with fury. He had no choice. He had to take them down one by one, or he wouldn't make it to the twins in time. Ethan fought with everything he had. His movements were a blur as he slashed through the creatures, each blow more precise than the last. The monsters were quick, but Ethan was faster. He used their aggression against them, sidestepping their attacks and countering with deadly precision. The creatures were relentless, but so was he. He could feel the weight of his sword growing heavier with each strike, but he didn't stop. The twins were counting on him. The room echoed with the sounds of battle, metal clashing against bone, hissing creatures, and the shrill cries of the monsters as they fell one by one. Ethan's body was covered in bruises, his armor scratched and dented from the vicious attacks, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, only one creature remained. It was larger than the others, towering over Ethan with an aura of power. Its eyes glowed brighter than ever, and its claws were longer and sharper. It had been watching him, studying him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan didn't hesitate. He knew this would be the hardest part of the fight. With a roar, the creature lunged at him, its claws aimed directly at his throat. Ethan ducked, rolling beneath the beast, and in one swift motion he brought his sword up, slicing across its underbelly. The creature howled in pain, but it wasn't finished. It turned, enraged, and swiped at Ethan with both claws. The force of the strike sent Ethan crashing into the stone floor. His sword slipped from his hand, landing several feet away. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Ethan could feel his breath growing shallow, his vision blurring, but then he saw the twins, their eyes wide with fear, their chains rattling as they tried to move. No. He couldn't let them down. With a surge of adrenaline, Ethan pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. He grabbed his sword and charged. Forward, his vision focused entirely on the creature. The beast turned just in time to see him coming, but it was too late. With all the strength he had left, Ethan drove his sword deep into the creature's chest, piercing its heart. The creature's eyes widened in shock before it collapsed, its body going limp. Ethan stood over it, panting heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead. It was over. Ethan turned to the twins, his heart pounding in his chest. They were still chained to the altar, but now they were safe. The monsters were defeated, and there was no one left to stop him. He rushed forward, his hands trembling as he worked quickly to free the twins. The chains were thick, but his sword made quick work of them. Within moments, they were free. The twins clung to him, their small arms wrapping around his neck in a tight hug. "Thank you," the twins whispered, their voices trembling with fear and relief. Ethan smiled weakly, though his body screamed for rest. "No need to thank me, let's get you out of here." With the twins safely in his arms, Ethan turned to leave the temple. But as he reached the entrance, something caught his eye. A faint glow shimmered in the air just beyond the shadows. He turned back to look, but there was nothing there. The monsters were gone, and the temple was silent once more. It was as if the battle had never happened. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, but he knew this wasn't the end. There was still one more challenge waiting for him, the mother's reward. But for now, he was just glad the twins were safe. Ethan stood still for a moment, catching his breath as the last of the monsters fell to the ground, their bodies scattered across the cold stone floor of the temple. The twins, safe in his arms, were clinging to him, their tiny bodies trembling with both fear and relief. He could feel their weight against him, their small hands gripping his clothes tightly as if afraid to let go. For a moment, everything was quiet. The battle had ended. The air that had once been thick with the sound of hissing and screeching monsters was now still, and the only noise that remained was the sound of his own breathing and the soft, nervous whispers of the twins. The temple, which had been a place of nightmares only moments ago, now seemed to calm, the shadows receding into the stone walls. The eerie blue glow from the carvings on the walls had dimmed, as though the temple itself recognized the end of the battle. Ethan's mind, however, was still racing. He had freed the twins, and for that he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. But there was something nagging at the back of his mind. The temple was old, ancient even, and he could feel that. It was far from finished with him yet. He turned to the twins, who were now quiet, their small faces pressed against his chest. He gently pulled them away, looking down at them with a smile that he hoped would reassure them. They were safe now, but he still had one more task to complete. He had promised their mother, the alien queen, that he would bring her children back, safely. There was no room for failure now. "We're going to be okay," Ethan whispered softly to the twins, though he wasn't entirely sure if he was reassuring them or himself. The twins nodded, their faces still pale from fear. But there was a hint of hope in their eyes. They had been through so much already, and yet they had somehow managed to survive. Ethan felt a deep respect for them. He had never met two beings so young and yet so strong. As he turned to leave the temple, his eyes fell on the altar where the twins had been chained. The stone structure was still dark and ominous, but there was something else, something strange about it. The glow of the symbols on the walls seemed to intensify, the air around him growing heavier once again. The battle had finally ended. Ethan stood in the remains of the temple, his body aching from the countless injuries he had sustained during the fight. His armor was scratched and battered, his sword stained with the blood of the monsters he had slain. His mind was still processing the events that had unfolded. The Guardian, the massive creature made of stone and energy, had been a formidable opponent, but Ethan had defeated it. The twins were safe now, and the temple no longer held its dark power over them. The twins, still clutching his arms, were quiet, their wide eyes filled with a mixture of awe and relief. They had been through so much, but now they were finally free. The chains that had bound them to the altar were shattered, and they were no longer prisoners of the monstrous creatures. Ethan took a deep breath and turned to face them. Their small hands tugged at his tunic, and they looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes. Despite everything that had happened, despite the horrors they had endured, the twins seemed to trust him completely. "You're safe now," Ethan said, softly, kneeling down to their level. His voice was calm, though he could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. He wasn't just their rescuer, he was their protector now, and that responsibility felt heavier than any battle he had ever fought. The twins nodded, their eyes still filled with fear, but there was also something else in them, something he hadn't seen before. They were starting to understand that they were not alone anymore. Ethan had given them a sense of security, and that was something they had been without for so long. One of the twins, a small girl with long silver hair and eyes as bright as the stars, stepped forward, her tiny hands reaching up to touch Ethan's face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for saving us." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. He had promised their mother, the alien queen, that he would bring her children back safely. And now, he had fulfilled that promise. It was a feeling of accomplishment, unlike any he had ever known, but it was also mixed with a sense of sadness. The twins had been through so much, and their innocence had been shattered in a way that no child should ever have to experience. "We're not done yet," Ethan said, gently, helping the twins to their feet. "We still need to get out of here." The twins nodded, their small hands clutching his, but there was a look of uncertainty in their eyes. They had been through so much already, and they didn't know what else to expect. But Ethan knew they had to move quickly. The temple had been a place of evil, and now that the Guardian had been defeated, he was certain the place would begin to collapse. Ethan's instincts were right. As soon as they turned to leave the chamber, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Again. The walls shook and dust began to fall from the ceiling. It was as if the temple was alive, fighting against the intrusion. The walls groaned in protest and the floor cracked beneath their feet. Quickly, Ethan shouted, his voice rising above the noise of the crumbling temple. He didn't have much time. The twins were still weak, and they needed to get out before the entire structure came down on top of them. With one arm wrapped around each of the twins, Ethan sprinted toward the exit. The temple seemed to fight against them at every turn, cracks opening in the stone, debris falling from above, and the very ground shifting beneath their feet. The twins clung to him, their faces pale with fear, but they didn't say a word. They trusted him. Ethan's heart raced as he pushed forward, his eyes scanning the path ahead. The exit was just up ahead, but it was blocked by a massive pile of rubble. The stone had collapsed in front of them, trapping them inside. He cursed under his breath. There was no time to waste. He had to get the twins out, and he had to do it now. Without hesitation, Ethan dropped to his knees and began to dig through the rubble. His hands scraped against the sharp stones, but he didn't care. The twins were depending on him. The temple was collapsing around them, and he couldn't let them get trapped here. The twins, despite their fear, helped him. They were small, but they were determined. They pulled at the stones, their tiny hands working as fast as they could. Ethan could see the effort in their eyes. They wanted to be free just as much as he did. Together, they managed to clear a path. It was narrow, but it was enough to get through. Ethan helped the twins through first, making sure they were safe before crawling through himself. The air outside was fresh and cool, and for the first time in what felt like days, they were free. But there was no time to celebrate. The temple was collapsing behind them, its foundations shaking and groaning as it fell apart. Ethan turned to look back at the wreckage. The ancient structure, which had once held so much power, was now crumbling into dust. He didn't stop to watch. The twins were safe now, and that was all that mattered. He turned back to them, and they looked up at him with eyes filled with gratitude. "You're safe," Ethan said again, his voice steady. "We made it." The twins smiled, their faces lighting up with the kind of joy they hadn't felt in so long. They were free, and that freedom was something priceless. But as Ethan looked around, he realized the journey wasn't over. They weren't safe yet. The jungle was still dangerous, and they had a long way to go before they could rest. The Queen would want to see her children, and Ethan knew that would not be easy. He looked down at the twins. They were exhausted, but their strength was evident in the way they stood tall beside him. They had been through so much, yet they were still standing, still fighting. Ethan felt a deep sense of respect for them. They had shown him the true meaning of resilience. With the twins by his side, Ethan set off into the jungle once more. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the trees and the mist that hung in the air. The jungle, which had been a place of terror, now seemed less menacing in the light of day. Ethan knew the worst was behind them, but the road ahead would be long and difficult. The twins had been through enough, but he knew that he would do whatever it took to ensure their safety. They had survived the horrors of the temple, but the true test was yet to come. As they walked through the jungle, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. The worst was over, but his work wasn't finished. There was still more to be done. But for now, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the moment. The twins were safe, and that was all that mattered. The sun was beginning to set as Ethan, carrying the twins in his arms, walked steadily through the jungle. The path ahead was still dangerous, but now there was a sense of hope in the air. The temple behind them had crumbled into dust, its ancient power fading as the earth took back what had once been its own. But Ethan didn't stop. His focus remained on the road ahead, the promise he had made to the Queen to return her children safely. The twins, though exhausted and bruised from their ordeal, walked beside him. Their small hands still clutched his tunic, their faces a mix of fear and relief. They were safe for now, but the journey was far from over. Ethan glanced at them, the weight of their survival pressing down on him. They had been through so much, but despite everything, they were still strong. There was something remarkable about their resilience. Even in the face of danger, they never gave up. He smiled, though it was weary. "We're almost there," We just need to get through this jungle, and then we'll find a way home. One of the twins, the boy, looked up at him with wide eyes. Home? His voice trembled. Where is home? Ethan's heart ached. These children had never known a life without danger, without fear. Home is where you're safe, he said, softly. Where you don't have to worry about monsters or being taken away. It's where your mother is. The twins nodded, their expressions brightening at the mention of their mother. They had not spoken much since they left the temple, but they were clearly anxious to reunite with their mother, the alien queen. The journey through the jungle was slow. The path was treacherous, and Ethan had to remain alert. The creatures that lurked in the shadows had been quiet for the most part, but Ethan knew they were still out there. The jungle was full of surprises, and he had no intention of being caught off guard. As the hours passed, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light over the jungle. The air had cooled, and the thick humidity that had followed them all day seemed to ease. Ethan knew that they would need to make camp soon, but he wasn't sure where the safest place would be. We'll stop here for the night, he said after a long pause. We'll rest for a few hours, then keep moving at first light. The twins nodded, but there was still uncertainty in their eyes. They were tired, but they were also afraid. The world outside the temple was unfamiliar, and they had no idea what lay ahead. Ethan knelt down and set the twins beside him, pulling out a small pack of supplies from his bag. It wasn't much, just some rations and a few basic tools, but it would be enough to keep them going for now. The twins, despite their weariness, ate silently, their eyes darting around the jungle, alert for any sign of danger. As they ate, Ethan kept watch. The jungle was alive with sounds, the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of unseen animals. But there was no sign of movement near them. He let out a slow breath, hoping for a peaceful night. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on the ground. The twins finished eating, their faces pale but calm. They had been through so much, but now they could finally rest. Ethan couldn't remember the